Hi there, and welcome to this morning's panel, which is Stigma, Silence and Suicide, We Need to Talk. I'm Mark Sandford. I'm a moderator of the panel today. I am the co-founder of the Book of Man, a media platform which is designed to explore the inner lives of men, get men talking about mental health and the things that are affecting them in their lives. So hopefully I'm well suited to talk to our three amazing panelists that we've got today. So suicide is one of the biggest killers of men and increasingly women in the UK. However, despite this, it is still largely considered a silent killer, a hidden killer, smothered by stigma, silent suffering and insufficient mental health resources to address the needs of those who reach out for help. This panel discussion will consider what businesses in the creative industries can do to help create an environment that enables employees to access the services and support they may require, breaking down the stigma and the silence around mental health in the process. So I'm now going to introduce the three amazing panelists onto the stage. We've got Wendy Robinson, Dewey, and Mike McCarthy. Hello. You take that. Hi guys, nice to see you. Obviously this is a very important topic that we're here to talk about today, but I thought it'd be good for each of us just to introduce yourselves before we start. Mike, if you... Oh, no, sorry. V, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. I'm Dewey. By trade, I'm a graphic designer, but my career has evolved over disciplines and verticals, and currently I'm the co-creator of Never Not Creative, an Australian-based and founded creative organization that focuses on the mental health and well-being of the creative industry.
Fantastic. Wendy?
Yeah, Wendy Robinson, Head of Services at the Campaign Against Living Miserably, CALM. And we are a suicide prevention charity, really taking a stand against suicide and trying to bring the whole conversation to the front of people's minds rather than something that, you know, maybe even the audience that we've got today, it kind of shows us that there is still a lot of silence and stigma and people find it difficult to talk about. So we're very much about changing that.
Thanks, Wendy. Mike?
Yeah, my name's Mike McCarthy. I shouldn't be here. In the life that I'd imagined for myself, I wasn't meant to be here. In the life that I imagined for myself, I'd be sort of sitting at home, enjoying a happy retirement. That all changed on the 21st of February last year when my son, Ross, who was beautiful, took his own life. There's quite a lot, obviously, that I'd like to say, but CALM, which is a fantastic charity, Campaign Against Living Miserably, asked me to get involved in a campaign last year called Stay, and they produced a very powerful video. It saves me from having to sort of, you know, say too much about something that's that hurts so much. So if you don't mind, we're just going to run a short video. I think it's about 3.5 minutes from the campaign Stay.
No matter how old your sons and daughters are, they're still your children. Even though Ross was 31, he's just my kid, you know. He was a dedicated family man, quite gregarious and could be cheeky, and it just really made us laugh. It was so funny. He was just a good man. You know, you wouldn't pick him out as the kind of person who you would expect to be in such a dark place that they would end up taking their own lives. But even I, as a father, didn't realise how close he was to the end. They had a very, very special relationship, and in his farewell letter, he wrote extensively to Charlie, basically to say goodbye and to encourage him to be brave. Ross believed very strongly in the power of proper support and therapy. So he asked his family to campaign for better mental health provision. One of the things about suicide is that there is still a huge amount of stigma surrounding the subject. I believe that if I and other people can talk openly, maybe we can do our little bit to try and get rid of that stigma. That vulnerability isn't weakness. If only we could change that attitude, we could save people like Ross. We could help them to stay with us. This is Ross's tree. It's been in our garden for 31 years, and every time I come down, I sort of basically stroke the leaves, think about him. You know, it's a poor substitute, but it's a way of him sort of being with us, you know. We as a family have never been through anything this hard, but we still believe that there is hope for people. Help is there. And anybody else who may find themselves in that situation, you know, reach out to the people who want you to stay, because you'll find that there are far more of them than you believe.
Thank you for playing that, Mike. Thank you. So I think to sort of set the scene, really, this panel is, I think we've heard so much in the industry about what we're trying to do to deal with mental health challenges and what's happening. What we want to get out of this panel today is some tangible actions. We want this not to be just a footnote at the end of a document in a workplace. We don't want this to be a box tick. We want this to be something that you can take away, take back to your offices, and make sure that there are some tangible actions happening. So the first question actually to V on that basis, obviously, you know, mental health is a huge challenge for employees, maintaining that mental health specifically and particularly after the pandemic or since the pandemic happened. But obviously, as I said, we've seen so many examples of companies not necessarily doing anything other than sort of focusing on it or box ticking. What do you think are some of the sort of key ways that we can turn that focus into meaningful actions?
Well, I think just thinking about this question, you know, in our culture, we think about if we have a body, you know, we have to manage our physical health. And since we have a brain, we have to manage our mental health. And especially in corporations, I think when you look at, you're spending 40 plus hours a week in work, and what is it surrounded by? It's culture. And I feel that ladders up to leadership. And to be able to create that tangible action and change is corporations looking to educate their leaders, not just promoting leaders, because so often we see leaders promoted that aren't being taught leadership skills. They're being promoted because, oh, they had a successful campaign or they met their numbers. But in reality, that's not what makes a good leader to create a culture. To create a culture that's not about just fitting in, about belonging. Because when you're fitting in, it's hiding, but when you're belonging, you can really show, as a friend of mine said, show your freak flag, show who you really are. So I think it's corporations investing in that, investing in the leadership training. I used to work at Adobe, and they've evolved their mental health support over the last couple of years, and it's called Adobe Cares, and it's a 12-month program, and it hits different elements. So you have a holistic approach from the person to your community to even how it plays to business. And they do recognize, and as Wendy and I were talking before, if you have a good culture, if you have mental health as a forefront, you're still going to be successful. You'll probably be even more beneficial to your business. So.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, since the pandemic, has that increased, or has it created more issues or barriers?
No, that's a great question, because I know even before COVID, through Never Not Creative, we found in our mental healthy report, and this is data leading up to COVID, 86% of our respondents thought their companies were doing something. They were engaging in their mental health, but yet in our empathy report that came out this year, it showed slightly different. We're still having high levels of depression, anxiety. Not much has changed that. So I think if anything, with our report coming out later this year, we'll probably see something spike even too. I hate to say that, so.
Yeah, interesting. Wendy, what from your perspective, obviously, what's your view on that? In terms of there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of things that are discussed and put in practice, into place, but actually, what's the reality of the situation in terms of the actual practice?
I think it's something very much around normalizing the whole area of mental health. So I guess, as we were saying, you could have a physical health challenge, and that would be something you'd be okay about talking to people at work around, taking time off. You wouldn't necessarily shut yourself away if you had a broken leg that you'd got skiing or something. That'd be something you'd be comfortable to kind of chat with people around. But I think it's when we feel a sense of shame, and that then if we don't see that others struggle and that there is a way through, then I think that just perpetuates this myth that it's only people, people not like me that have mental health issues, or I'm different, I'm weak, I don't belong here. So I think it's normalizing it, but it has to be spoken about at every level.
Yeah.
And I think you can see organizations sometimes who have real kind of figurehead CEOs who speak really powerfully about mental health, but if your own line manager is not somebody who's comfortable with you speaking about it, then you will actually maybe keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think when we hear from people who reach out to Calm, quite often it is that sense of shame and not belonging that is a really strong predictor of feeling that maybe life's not worth living. And I think, again, as Vi said, how many hours we spend at work, that is often the culture that will shape our sense of self. So it has to be a really big issue for us to make a difference there.
Yeah, and it has to come from all areas, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. And just, Mike, obviously, if that video shows us anything, incredibly powerful, it shows that, not enough is being done, I think, from an action point of view. What's your sort of perspective on that there is probably too much talk and not enough action actually happening?
Yeah, absolutely. He said sitting here talking about it. I think that's the key thing that, a lot of people are talking about, mental health in general, not so much actually about suicide and suicide prevention, and that has clearly got to change. It is the biggest killer of under 35s in this country, men and women, not COVID, not cancer, not road accidents, not drugs, suicide. Let's say the word. Let's be open about it. Let's be transparent. Let's have a healthy conversation. In terms of the workplace, again, people are talking about it, and that's a great thing. And I pay tribute to the younger generations, certainly generations who are far younger than I am, who are pushing the agenda. And, good on them. Good on them. A lot of good work going on there. And as I say, the younger generations, in general terms, setting the agenda. But I was saying, sort of backstage there, that if I'm approached by one more company who asks me to endorse an app, or if I hear of one more company who says, "Oh yeah, we've ticked that box, mental health, all under control, we've given them an app. Please, get real. Let's get real. This is a silent pandemic." And it's time to change that. I think that's the thing now. Okay, enough talking. Let's think of practical changes that we can make, and we can all make them. We've all got responsibility, whether you're at the highest levels of government setting suicide prevention strategy, or if you're just sending an extra text to your mate today saying, "How are you really?" We've all got a role to play.
Yeah, I mean, on that as well, I think, we've talked about kind of actions and things, and I think one of the things that Wendy would like to ask you about is barriers, and we talk, obviously the headline of this is about stigma. I think it can be very difficult for someone to feel confident enough to approach their line manager or manager at work about, challenges that they're going through. But what do you think are the common barriers within an organisation that create that?
I think a term that thankfully we're getting more comfortable thinking about, learning about and putting into practice is this whole area of psychological safety. And this is really where the whole of you is welcome to turn up at work, whether it's the kind of like the you that feels really productive, or the you that's really struggling, the you that had a great weekend, the you that's just lost a friend to suicide or any other issue, and feeling that you can come as your whole self and you won't be ridiculed, you won't be shamed, you can share concerns, but it's also something about being able to share when you have some questions about the organization as well. And think often people will feel that they can only speak positively, or they get seen as a troublemaker, or, you know, so actually then, and people, you know, it's really important that we have structures in the workplace like performance management, if you wouldn't like that term, or, you know, it should mean how we help people learn and develop, how we reward people, how we acknowledge the work that they've done and help them, you know, look forward to what they can do in the future. Often it's used as a way of kind of putting fear into people. And I think the opposite of psychological safety obviously is to feel fearful. And I think that is a real barrier, because until we start showing that the whole range of human emotion is welcome at work. Now, of course, we go to work to be productive, but I think sometimes that gets thrown back at, so if we focus too much on psychological safety and well-being and have all these, you know, various kind of ways of exploring that in the workplace, that we're actually generating some kind of sense of not focusing on the work. But I think people really miss the point that when you're feeling well and healthy, you want to go to work and you want to do well at work. And when it comes to suicide, I think we also really need to remember that it's a journey that people go on. It's very rare that somebody will go from feeling absolutely fine. There is something called rapid onset despair, which actually can be something that can be an issue for younger people, because there's the perspective around actually, you know, when you're kind of my grand old age, you've had enough kind of hard knocks at times to be able to think, actually, I've been through this before, I kind of know it gets easier, I've got some support structures. Younger people sometimes will have that sense of one big thing happening, and it can really trigger them. But most people will actually go on a journey from, you know, feeling some sense of despair, not feeling okay. They may speak to a GP, they may speak to a friend, don't get the help that they need. And actually there are lots of points along that journey. So I think the barriers are really around making people feel that unless it's really kind of, you know, life-threatening, that nobody wants to hear about it. And then the other side of it is, when it is life-threatening, people are afraid they don't know what to do. So I've spoken to, you know, people that reach out to us will say, well, I've tried to speak to someone at work, and they just looked like really not only shocked, but they had no idea how to help me. So I think it's that leadership training, but really learning how to respond when somebody tells you that they're struggling, and that actually we often fear that if we put it into words, if we say to someone, are you considering suicide? Do you feel like life isn't worth living? That somehow we actually put that idea in someone's head. That's not the case. Actually, what we really know, and there's plenty of evidence to support it, that if you can gently and in the right environment say that to someone, they feel heard, they feel seen, they feel able to then say, actually, yes, and then you can start the real conversation to look at how you can support them and help them stay.
Yeah, great. And I think that just sort of folds nicely into my next question, actually, which Mike, I'd like to sort of ask you, actually, which is around language, and the language we use at work, and the language that we're referring to people, you know, who are going through challenges. And, you know, there's certain things around, you know, using the word neurotic to describe someone, or, you know, or whatever, which, you know, we should be talking about neurosis and all the different things that affect them. And one of the ones that we're here to talk about today is committing suicide, and how that term has become, you know, almost, it's almost as if you're putting guilt and shame and blame on the person that's taken their own life. So we need to start removing things like that in order to make, you know, people feel more comfortable talking about these things and take away that level of shame that maybe exists. So on that basis then, Mike, in terms of language, obviously language is important in opening up conversations. It helps shape thoughts and kind of gets actions made. What's your view on language and how important that is?
I'm a journalist. You know, I worked as a journalist for 40 years, and I recognise, obviously, the importance of language, and I think there's such a close connection between language and stigma. I think when stigma increases, people stop seeking help, ignorance flourishes, and a vacuum of silence is created. Ignorance breeds and death soar when there is stigma. And, you know, even the most basic of language, and I don't know, I grew up in a generation where, you know, we're often accused of being sort of non-PC. But it's only as of 21st of February 2021 that I recognise the importance of the phrase committed suicide. And to my shame, I probably used that as a journalist in some of the pieces that I did and some of the films that I made. I have lived at a time when people who tried to take their own lives could be and were put in prison if they survived. What kind of a society were we? And do you know when the General Synod of the Church of England updated the 16th century Book of Common Prayer? And this is what that book said. The way that a funeral service, it said by the way that a funeral service may not be used for any that have laid violent hands upon themselves. That was updated in 2015. That's from the 16th century. And let's celebrate the advances. We're moving towards a more enlightened age, but we're not moving anything like fast enough. So, you know, the word commit relates to that time before 1961 when suicide was a crime. It was considered illegal. You committed rape, you committed murder, you committed suicide. They were all put together in the same file. And here we are, more than 60 years later, and I still hear clinicians, mental health experts, journalists still using that phrase. And I only know now, truly, how much it hurts, because Ross wasn't perfect, but he didn't commit a crime. People aren't attention-seeking, they're attention-needing. That's what they are. That's the kind of language we should be using. And for men, societal expectations on men today are ridiculously out of date. It's a lie. Boxers do cry, footballers cry, rugby players cry, real men do cry. And yet we still get phrases like, man up. What does that mean? Shut up, take it on the chin, suppress it, bury it, don't share it. So I think if we're not getting the basic language right, then we've got a long, long way to go. As I say, let's celebrate the steps that we're making, but so many myths attached. This is partly as a result of the language, and the stigma and the myths that suicide is selfish, it's the coward's way out. Talking about suicide is a trigger. No, it's not. Clinicians who know what they're talking about, academics, people who've got real lived experience know that talking about suicide is not a trigger. In fact, the one thing that is probably likely to help someone who is suicidal more than anything else is for someone to kindly say to them, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Have you made a plan? So yeah, sorry, I've gone on for a long time. I'm a journalist, I talk too much. So apologies, but yeah, it's a really important subject, and I hope that if you get a quiet second later today, maybe get a chance to send your mates a text and just say, been thinking about you today.
Yeah, really important. And Wendy, on the sort of side of things with obviously CALM and the services you provide, obviously how important is it when you're talking to your teams about the language they use, and obviously when someone calls up and maybe hasn't had a conversation before and hasn't had that initial chat, how does language play a part in that?
Yeah, so our helpline workers are all paid professionals who are trained to talk to people in distress. And I think really what they are able to do is help someone feel welcome. And that although, of course, helpline workers won't talk about themselves, I think something that every one of us can do is like we lead by example. So I think checking in on someone and saying, how are you doing, is absolutely spot on. I think how we can kind of like make the ground more fertile for that conversation is to let people know how we really are as well. And to kind of like start a conversation by sort of sharing where things are at with you, and then you can ask someone. I think if you ask straight out, it kind of plays into that thing of like, oh, you're okay and I'm not okay, so I'm just going to tell you I'm okay. But I think, there's plenty of things we can take from how helpline workers are. They don't, act shocked. They go at a person's pace. They're not afraid to put things into words, to genuinely ask someone, do you have a plan? And by a plan, we mean, do you have means? Are you actually intending? And I think, helping people, not only the people that have got those feelings themselves, but we hear from lots of people who are concerned about others as well, and it's giving them some guidance of what to kind of be aware of. On our website, which you'll find absolutely tons of really good information to help you have those conversations, so I'd really urge you to have a look at that. But I think it's just becoming more familiar with having difficult conversations, and it's only by having them regularly that they become more straightforward. So I guess our helpline workers are having them every day, day in, day out, which on one hand is incredibly sad, isn't it? That thousands of people reach out every week, every day with that as an issue. But at the same time, thank goodness we're there and others are there to hear that story. And it really is the start of being able to stay and having more hope.
So I think the last few things we've heard have really kind of created a foundation of the very basics that we need to start doing, the very basics that anyone, no matter what industry you're working in, whatever business you're working in, needs to start happening more and more. It needs to be much more visible and needs to be much more accessible for people. But I think if we just want to turn our attention sort of more specifically to the creative industry, obviously there's obviously a lot of creators in the audience today, and this is what we're here to talk about really. Creative industry is quite unique in a way. It's incredibly competitive, it's incredibly high-pressured. There's a constant want to impress and perform, and I think that can in itself cause issues. But within that as well, within some of the cultures that exist within the creative industry, there are instances of gaslighting and bullying and things which exacerbate those areas as well. So I suppose the question, and this is to V obviously with the work that you do, this is more around the idea of within the creative industry itself, how can we as an industry create better environments to create more empathy and more understanding for the people that exist within them, essentially?
I think it just goes back to what I said earlier. It's going back to the leadership, and especially as Wendy said, like even though, look at Adobe or other corporations, they do have the mental health initiatives, but yet if it gets stuck in the middle level that's where the training really is needed. When we released our empathy report earlier this year at the launch, there was a leader from Havas in Sydney, and she was saying basically leaders should be not listen to hear, don't listen to respond. It's learning to be able to be there as the support for your team, to create that culture of inclusion, to create that understanding, because there is a gap in that. Like through our research, we found that leadership thinks, 70% of leadership from our survey thought, oh, we're an inclusive culture, we're empathetic, but yet 55% of the mid to junior or senior level don't think that. So there is a disconnect. So I think it's educating again. It's going to be like the hammer effect of reiterating that, but leadership makes the difference because they do set the tone. They lead by example, and they create that culture. I remember reading through our data, and one of the comments, somebody said, and also too, I think this pertains to how you interact with clients too, because I was reading, there's one comment from one of our respondents, they said, I was at a client party the night before, ended up at the A&E. Early the next morning, my client calls me and said, how will this affect my deadline? How will this affect, and I think it's not just, it's the leadership also going beyond creating that culture, but also protecting and going beyond just, oh, this is my team of 6 people. We need leaders to stop doing anything for their clients at the expense of young workers in the business. We need leaders to be able to understand fully what this mental health is, and not, as one person said from our foundings, is my manager regularly makes fun of my mental illness. Right. So I think it's just going back to creating that education. And it's not, we don't need, as some of our findings said, we don't need the healthy food or healthy snacks offerings. We don't need that mindfulness app anymore, as Mike mentioned the app. It's more of that proactive and really taking the systemic change. And I think, I might go off on a tangent though, but what we're talking about behind is also, I think, is with these leaders, with leadership training, effective leadership training, it's facing the fear, it's facing your own internal, because to be able to be a good leader, you have to look at yourself first. You have to go internal, and that is scary. And then from there, you can go outwards. But it's a whole, I will keep going back and say leadership. So.
Yeah. Do you still think there are issues of, anyone within a creative organization, calling out that sort of behavior, that in terms of, it can be quite challenging for someone who's maybe not getting the support they need, and maybe they're not getting, or even getting, mocked for their challenge. Do you think there's a culture of fear of being able to call that sort of behavior out?
It depends on the organization.
Yeah.
I think especially when you're in an organization, the typical place would go to HR, but HR is not for your support anymore. So if you had your manager, that one manager who mocked your mental health, you couldn't go to your HR. So that, but yet there are companies like Dentsu and Omnicom who are bringing in outside support, such as Sanctus, which is a one-on-one coaching. It could be career coaching, but also more of like coaching around mental health. So I think there are organizations that are seeing that and supporting that. But yet, if you look at some of these traditional corporations that have been around 50, 70 years, you just don't have that network as, unfortunately.
They've got a kind of a big move to reverse out of that, whereas a new startup or a new business can probably be a bit more nimble in that respect, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So we'll come on to that, and hopefully we can take a couple of questions on that, because I think it would be interesting to elaborate on that point. Mike, I know you've sort of talked a lot about a language and everything that you've been working on, obviously, with Calm, etc. But you've recently launched the Baton of Hope as well, which is an initiative that you've started, been a few months now. Could you just tell us a little bit about that and how people can get involved, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. At the end of the video there, I was talking about hope, and this is a sad subject, obviously, and we can't get away from that. But I really do believe that there is hope. As I said in the video, Ross wrote a long farewell letter, and in that letter he wrote, "Please fight for mental health. The support is just not there." And I understand completely, what he meant by that. I've done a lot of research since we lost him, and the neglect out there is woeful. But what I've also found is that there are some fantastic charities, such as Calm, for example, who are doing excellent things. So in a sense, Ross, I don't agree with you on that point. There is hope. The support is there. If you look for it, we shouldn't have to look so hard for it, but it is there. And the Baton of Hope, just to sort of cut to the chase, is that I got together, I spoke to a lot of people who had been suicidal, who survived, and I spoke to a lot of doctors, nurses, charities, etc., etc. And what I found is fragmentation, that people weren't speaking with one voice. And this is so important, that we've got to unite, we've got to speak with one voice. So the Baton of Hope is an actual physical hope. It's physical baton. It's being created, designed, and made by a company called Thomas Light, who are goldsmiths and silversmiths to the Queen. It'll be carried around the UK next year, shining a spotlight on best practice, encouraging people to learn about what is out there, encouraging an open, transparent conversation about suicide. We will take it through the country and we'll take it to Parliament. It's a baton, it represents responsibility, because as I said earlier, I believe that we all have a part to play. We'll take it to Parliament and it'll be put on permanent display there as a reminder to the legislators, the MPs, as they go about their daily work. Remember these voices, listen to these voices, hear the voices that have gone, and hear the voices of the people who find themselves in that same dark place, and take responsibility. Please take responsibility. So we've got together some fantastic people. We formed an organising committee. People around the country, around the world are emailing us and texting us and asking to get involved. If you get a chance, please go onto our website, batonofhopeuk.org. You can register your interest on there. We want as many people to be involved, and we want to bring unity, and we want to make a practical difference. That's, it's about change, basically.
Brilliant. That's awesome. And did you want to talk about what's going on this afternoon as well?
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Just a quick one. As I say, I'm all about practical change. I don't just talk too much. I try to do a bit of practical stuff as well. So I've set up talk clubs in my home city of Sheffield, at Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. This is basically for men to come along and, instead of manning up and bottling up, open up. So we're running a talk club session between 1 and 2. It's near the VIP hut, I think it's called. Any guys who want to sort of come along just to get some idea of what Talk Club is, again, superb charity who I chose to work for alongside Calm. And so between 1 and 2. Tell all the people who aren't here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I think there's been some really impassioned points in the last sort of 5-10 minutes of discussion up here. And I said at the beginning, what I want this to be, and I think what we all want this panel to be, is not just let's go back and think about what was said. I think I want people to go away and actually do something and have some tangible actions to take back to the office. And I think, it's not just about maybe how you're feeling, but also about, whether you're concerned about someone else. That's something that Mike brought up earlier, texting a mate and seeing how they are if you're worried about them. It might not be yourself that's affected, but someone in your life might be going through something that you need to try and intervene or help. So I suppose, as a final point for the panel, I just want to be able to give the audience a couple of takeaways to go away with. So, Wendy, if I could start with you, just some actions that people can really take away and actually do something really important with.
Something that's really occurred to me while we're sitting up here is we've talked about creativity, we've talked about hope. And I think creativity is hope in action, actually. And you're all hugely creative. And creative doesn't necessarily mean something that we're making and creating. It means creating relationships, creating conversations. So after today, I would just suggest that you check in on yourself, actually, first and foremost. Just see how any of the conversational points we've had today have touched you. If they've left you feeling a little bit kind of unsure about something or concerned about someone, go with your instincts. You only really need one person that you can trust, and I think turn to that person. They want to hear about it, and as I said earlier, that's, you speaking about your stuff will help them talk about theirs. And I think going back into the workplace, ask some difficult questions, but place it into yourself and say, whether it's to your line manager or to your organization or whoever it is, what am I supposed to do if somebody tells me that they're suicidal? What, as an organization, would we do if this happened? How do we make sure that we're not sitting here in 6 months' time planning to attend a funeral of one of our own? I think asking some of those questions really shine a light and make policies something that are a creative practice. So I think that's what I would leave you with.
Thanks, Wendy. Fee.
I probably will be piggybacking off of Wendy to some degree, but for me, because I've been there, I've hit rock bottom. I've found myself, taking myself in the middle of the night to the A&E, bleeding out on a gurney. And I had my moment, it's like, what's your non-negotiables? What is your non-negotiables moving forward for your mental health? My non-negotiable was, I'm moving from the United States, I'm leaving corporate, finding that. Fortunately, I did have an infrastructure of support around me, but yet, even having the infrastructure, I still felt alone. But it was having that moment of clarity. I'm just probably a really dark moment, but it was having, what are your non-negotiables, and just list that out. And I've had other friends who've done similar too, to try, frame what their next step is, how they're going to proceed with their life, and so forth. So.
Yeah. Okay, get some clarity.
Yeah. Thank you. Just 2 words from me: challenge, because the status quo is dreadful. It's led to the stagnation in suicide statistics for 20 years. They rise a bit, they go down a bit. They rise a bit, they go down a bit. But for 20 years plus, actually, they have remained stubbornly stagnated. and we've got to challenge that, as Wendy says. The only other thing I would say is that I loved Ross and Ross loved me, and I have no regrets about the 31 years that we shared with him. But if there's one thing that if I could turn back the clock, instead of being a dad and trying to fix him, I would have listened more. So challenge and listen.
I think there's some very good points there. I think listening as well as talking, giving people the opportunity to talk and listening to them is really key. Great, thank you very much, guys. I hope you've all taken something away from that. We have got time, hopefully, for one or two questions. One question, if there are any questions.
Thanks. It's less a question, more of an offer, really. I work with Wendy at the Campaign Against Living Miserably in a very different discipline. I head up all the brand partnerships that we do, which are a big part of how Calm gets into people's lives, sort of through stealth, if you like. And the offer is one of those tangible takeaways. I often go out to agencies such as those I'm sure you work in and do a lunch and learn or a breakfast briefing, whatever you call those things these days, where I talk a little bit about Calm and talk about how we work with brands and how we work in that creative space to really make a difference, because Calm is a very different organisation in the area in which we work. We're quite alternative to the way a lot of the establishment works, I think, in this sector. And it's quite an interesting story. It's an incredible brand. It gets people engaged. Anyway, the long and short of that is it's a really good Trojan horse for getting people in your organisation aware of Calm. So if perhaps some of the platforms and services and support that are in place in your organisation may not work for some people, perhaps Calm, if they're aware of Calm, could. And so it's just a really sneaky way of getting awareness and engagement with Calm up in your organisation. So we're there to do that kind of stuff if you would like us to.
Oh, do we have one more? Thank you. Two more?
Thank you. Hi, do you know of any other organisations besides Calm that might, so I have just started a business and we are now looking at employing people, and again, like it's in the advertising industry, which is, I know that I felt incredibly overwhelmed when I first joined about all of the drinking culture and the drug culture, and I now would like to offer my kind of new employees that support that I never had, which is not necessarily to do with suicide as far as that, but just kind of to know that we're there to support them. And are there any organisations that you might suggest, because as a startup we don't have the funding to have one-on-one coaching to offer that kind of support, but I wondered if you knew of any organisations that might offer that.
Was that, sorry, just I think if I heard correctly, so are there any organisations within our industry that help support people that are challenged or going through some challenges with it, whether it's not necessarily suicidal, but kind of on the
or
general
perhaps
support?
Just starting out in the industry and don't want to have to impress their bosses by going and drinking and getting drunk at the party.
Right, yeah.
But just are able to talk and yeah, I guess so.
Understood, yeah, got you. Did you understand the question?
I think so. So
yeah. So I think is there any signposts for just general support within the industry with regards to not necessarily conforming to the drinking and career development? Got you. Okay. Yeah. So any support with career development before it gets to the stage where it becomes crisis point, I think is the question.
Okay, so because one name that came to mind was NABS.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's probably here in the UK, that's for the industry, that's the best one, I would say, at this point.
NABS are fantastic.
Yeah.
They do a lot of, they offer a lot of support in various areas of your career and your development, but they also provide grants and various other things if you need help funding any treatment or anything else you need as well. So they have been there for a number of my colleagues in the past and myself as well, so I would just highly recommend. NABS, yeah. Fantastic. I think that's all we've got time for, but I'd just like to say a massive thank you again to Wendy, Mike and V for the panel today, and thank you all for coming as well. Appreciate it. Thank you.